Western Australia, a land of vast distances, rugged beauty, and immense natural resources. It is a place where the outback stretches to the horizon, where ancient landscapes meet modern cities, and where a spirit of independence runs deep. This is also a land that has long felt a disconnect from the rest of Australia. Geographically isolated, Western Australia is closer to Indonesia than it is to its own national capital, Canberra. This isolation has fostered a unique cultural identity, a sense of self-reliance, and at times a burning desire for self-determination. The story of Western Australia's uneasy relationship with the Australian Federation began at the very moment of its creation. In 1901, when the 6 British colonies united to form the Commonwealth of Australia, Western Australia was hesitant to join. The people of the West feared being overshadowed by the more populous and politically powerful eastern states. They worried that their interests would be ignored and their resources exploited for the benefit of others. These fears were not entirely unfounded. The development of infrastructure, such as the Transcontinental Railway, was seen as essential for connecting Western Australia to the rest of the country. But progress was slow, fueling resentment towards the perceived indifference of the East. The Great Depression of the 1930s exacerbated these tensions. As the global economy contracted, Western Australia was hit hard. This period saw the first serious push for secession, culminating in the 1933 referendum, where a resounding 66% of Western Australians voted to leave the Federation. In the early 2000s, Western Australia's mining industry was valued at around $43 billion. Fast forward to today, and that figure has exploded. And by 2024, Western Australia's iron ore exports alone brought in a staggering $138 billion, more than some countries' entire GDP. But it's not just iron ore. Western Australia is a giant in gold, producing 211 tons worth $12 billion in a single year. Copper mining is also booming, valued at $1.4 billion. And let's not forget natural gas and lithium, crucial for global industries. This mining boom has created over 126,000 full-time jobs, boosting not just the state's economy but the entire country's GDP. In fact, Western Australia accounts for 46% of Australia's total merchandise exports, making it a lottery win for the nation's economy. But despite contributing so much, Western Australia has long felt shortchanged. Billions leave the state through GST redistribution, funding the eastern states, while Western Australia gets back less than it puts in. This frustration has fueled secessionist movements for decades, leading to the Waxit debate. The year 1901 marked a pivotal moment in Australian history, the birth of a nation. After decades of debate and negotiation, the 6 British colonies of New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania and Western Australia agreed to federate, forming the Commonwealth of Australia. This union, however, was not without its skeptics, particularly in the vast and distant colony of Western Australia. Separated from the eastern states by thousands of kilometers of arid outback, Western Australians had long felt a sense of geographic and cultural isolation. For many in the West, the prospect of joining a federation dominated by the more populous and politically powerful eastern states was met with trepidation. There were concerns that Western Australia's unique needs and interests would be overlooked in distant Canberra, the newly established capital. Despite these reservations, the movement for federation gained momentum, driven in part by the promise of greater economic security and national unity. To appease Western Australian concerns, the eastern states offered a number of concessions, including the construction of a transcontinental railway linking Perth to Sydney. In a closely contested referendum held in July 1900, Western Australians voted in favour of joining the Federation. The margin of victory, however, was slim, reflecting the deep divisions that persisted within the state. The global economic crisis of the 1930s, known as the Great Depression, had a profound impact on Australia, and its effects were felt particularly acutely in Western Australia. The collapse of international trade and the plummeting price of commodities such as wheat and wool devastated the state's economy. Unemployment soared, businesses collapsed, and hardship became widespread. Adding to the resentment was the perception that federal policies designed to stimulate economic recovery were skewed in favor of the more industrialized eastern states. Tariffs and other protectionist measures intended to bolster manufacturing in the East were seen as detrimental to Western Australia's export-dependent economy. It was against this backdrop of economic hardship and political disillusionment that the secessionist movement gained significant traction in Western Australia. Leading the charge was a group of prominent Western Australians, including politicians, businessmen, and newspaper editors, who argued that the state's interests could only be served by breaking away from the Federation. In 1933, the simmering discontent reached a boiling point. A referendum was held, asking Western Australians a simple but momentous question: are you in favour of the state of Western Australia withdrawing from the Federal Commonwealth? The result was a resounding yes, with over 68% of voters supporting secession. The aftermath of World War II ushered in a period of unprecedented economic growth and prosperity for Australia, and Western Australia, blessed with abundant natural resources, rode the wave of this post-war boom. The discovery of vast iron ore deposits in the Pilbara region in the 1960s transformed the state's economic fortunes, attracting significant foreign investment and fueling rapid industrial development. Western Australia emerged as a major global supplier of raw materials, and its economy boomed. This period of economic expansion, however, also brought new challenges and exacerbated existing tensions within the Federation. Western Australia, despite its growing economic clout, still felt overlooked by Canberra. Federal funding for infrastructure and services lagged behind the state's needs, fueling resentment and the perception that Western Australia was being treated as a cash cow to subsidise the eastern states. The issue of federal taxation became a major point of contention. The 1970s witnessed a surge in resource nationalism globally, and Australia was no exception. The OPEC oil crisis of 1973 highlighted the strategic importance of natural resources and emboldened resource-rich nations to assert greater control over their assets. In Australia, this sentiment found expression in the rise of figures like Lang Hancock, a mining magnate and passionate advocate for Western Australian secession. Hancock's message resonated with many Western Australians who felt that the state's contribution to the national economy was not being adequately recognised or rewarded. He founded the Australian secession movement in 1974, tapping into a deep well of resentment towards the perceived fiscal imbalance within the Federation. Western Australia stands as a powerhouse of the Australian economy, a resource-rich giant fueling the nation's prosperity. Its vast reserves of iron ore, gold, natural gas, and other minerals have driven decades of economic growth, making it a magnet for investment and a major player on the global stage. However, this prosperity has come at a price, one that many Western Australians believe is disproportionately high. The state's heavy reliance on the resources sector has made its economy vulnerable to the cyclical nature of global commodity markets. Booms bring immense wealth, but also inflationary pressures, rising living costs, and a strain on infrastructure. Busts can lead to job losses, business closures, and a sharp decline in government revenue, leaving the state grappling with budget deficits and economic uncertainty. This boom and bust cycle has fueled a sense of frustration among many Western Australians who feel that the benefits of their state's wealth are not being shared fairly. At the heart of Western Australia's economic grievances lies the thorny issue of the Goods and Services Tax, or GST, distribution system. Established in 2000, the GST is a broad-based consumption tax levied by the federal government and then distributed among the states and territories. The distribution formula, however, has been a perennial source of contention. with Western Australia consistently receiving a smaller share of GST revenue per capita than any other state. This disparity, despite recent adjustments to the formula, continues to fuel a sense of injustice and stoke calls for reform. Recognizing the inherent volatility of a resource-dependent economy, successive Western Australian governments have pursued policies aimed at diversifying the state's economic base. The goal to create a more resilient and sustainable economy, less susceptible to the boom and bust cycles of the mining sector. These efforts have yielded some success, with growth in sectors such as tourism, agriculture, education, and technology. However, the path to diversification has been fraught with challenges, often fueling resentment towards the perceived indifference of the federal government. The sector's immense size and profitability have created a Dutch disease effect, making it difficult for other industries to compete for resources, investment, and skilled labor. Furthermore, Western Australian businesses often face higher operating costs compared to their counterparts in the eastern states. This, in turn, discourages investment and makes it challenging for new industries to gain a foothold. Western Australia's vast distances and challenging terrain make infrastructure investment essential for economic growth and social development. Roads, railways, ports, airports, energy infrastructure, and telecommunications networks are not merely conveniences, but the very lifelines connecting communities, facilitating trade, and underpinning economic activity. Yet, despite its economic significance, Western Australia has long grappled with a persistent infrastructure deficit, fueled by inadequate federal funding and a perceived bias towards projects in the eastern states. Its capital city, Perth, is more isolated than any other major city in the world. This isolation has profound implications for the state's economy, requiring significant investment in transportation infrastructure to connect businesses to markets and ensure the efficient movement of goods and people. The idea of Western Australian secession, once a fringe movement championed by mining magnates and disgruntled farmers, has experienced a resurgence in recent years, capturing the imagination of a new generation disillusioned with the status quo. No longer confined to the dusty backrooms of political meetings, the Waxit sentiment has found a powerful voice in the digital age, amplified by social media, online forums, and a growing sense of Western Australian identity distinct from the eastern states. This renewed push for independence is driven by a complex interplay of factors, from lingering economic grievances to a perceived cultural disconnect, and a growing belief that Western Australia's interests are best served by going it alone. The global financial crisis of 2008 and its aftermath played a significant role in reigniting the Waxit debate. This divergence in economic fortunes fueled a sense of resentment among many Western Australians who felt that their state, once again, had bailed out the rest of the country, only to be met with indifference and a lack of appreciation. The COVID-19 pandemic, which swept across the globe in early 2020, had a profound impact on Australia, both in terms of public health and politics. For Western Australia, the pandemic served as a catalyst for a dramatic assertion of state autonomy, as the government, led by Premier Mark McGowan, implemented some of the strictest border closures and lockdown measures in the country. While these measures were initially met with mixed reactions, they ultimately proved effective in containing the spread of the virus, leading to remarkably low infection and mortality rates in Western Australia compared to other parts of the country. The hard border policy, which effectively cut Western Australia off from the rest of the country for almost 2 years, had a profound impact on the state's psyche. For others, it was a time of unprecedented unity and a sense of collective purpose, as Western Australians rallied behind their government's leadership and embraced the mantra of keeping Western Australia safe. The COVID-19 pandemic propelled Mark McGowan, the Labor Premier of Western Australia, from a relatively unknown state leader to a national figure, admired for his decisive leadership and his unwavering commitment to protecting the health and well-being of Western Australians. McGowan's popularity soared during the pandemic, his approval ratings reaching unprecedented highs as he navigated the state through the crisis with a steady hand and a no-nonsense approach. This surge in popularity translated into a landslide victory for the Labour Party in the 2021 state election, securing McGowan a second term with an increased majority and a mandate to continue his assertive approach to governing. The future of the Waxit movement hangs in the balance, poised at a crossroads between the allure of independence and the pragmatism of seeking greater autonomy within the Australian Federation. The movement's trajectory will be shaped by a complex interplay of factors, including the state's economic fortunes, the political landscape, and the evolving relationship between Western Australia and the federal government. The path forward is far from certain, with both options presenting their own unique set of challenges and opportunities. The Australian Constitution, the foundational document of the nation, is remarkably silent on the question of secession. Unlike the constitutions of some other federations, which explicitly outline a process for member states to withdraw, the Australian Constitution offers no clear legal pathway for a state to secede from the Commonwealth. This silence, however, does not necessarily preclude the possibility of secession, but it does create significant legal ambiguity and opens the door to a range of interpretations and potential challenges. The prevailing legal opinion, based on the principle of parliamentary sovereignty and the High Court's interpretation of the Constitution, is that the federal parliament has the ultimate authority to determine whether or not a state can secede. In other words, secession would require the consent of the very institution that the secessionist movement seeks to break away from. Given the political improbability of the federal government willingly dismantling the federation, this legal hurdle presents a formidable, if not insurmountable, obstacle for the Waxit movement. The principle of self-determination, enshrined in the United Nations Charter and other international legal instruments, grants all peoples the right to freely determine their own political status and pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. This principle has been invoked by numerous secessionist movements around the world as a legal and moral justification for their claims to independence. However, the application of self-determination in the context of secession is complex and often contested, with no universally agreed-upon criteria for determining when and how the principle applies. International law generally recognizes the right to self-determination in cases where a people are subjected to colonial rule, foreign occupation, or other forms of systematic oppression. In these situations, self-determination is seen as a means of rectifying historical injustices and ensuring the fundamental rights of the oppressed group. Uncharted waters, the legal and political quagmire of Waxit. The legal and political complexities surrounding the prospect of Western Australian secession create a veritable quagmire, with no easy answers or clear precedents to guide the way forward. The absence of a specific secession clause in the Australian Constitution, the contested nature of self-determination in international law, and the political realities of a federation fiercely protective of its territorial integrity all combine to create a formidable set of obstacles for the Waxit movement. Navigating this treacherous terrain would require a deft hand, a compelling legal strategy, and a significant shift in the political winds. One potential avenue for the Waxit movement to pursue would be to challenge the constitutionality of any attempt by the federal government to prevent Western Australia from seceding. This would involve mounting a legal challenge in the High Court, arguing that the Constitution either explicitly or implicitly recognizes a right to secession. However, as previously mentioned, this line of argument faces significant hurdles, given the High Court's historical deference to the principle of parliamentary sovereignty and its reluctance to overturn established constitutional principles. an independent Western Australia utopia or uncharted territory. The prospect of an independent Western Australia, while politically improbable in the near term, nonetheless captures the imagination and fuels passionate debate on both sides of the secessionist divide. Advocates envision a future where Western Australia, unshackled from the perceived constraints of the Federation, flourishes as a sovereign nation, charting its own course and reaping the full benefits of its vast natural wealth. Skeptics, however, caution against such utopian visions, highlighting the economic, political, and social uncertainties that independence would inevitably entail. The reality, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere between these two extremes, with the success or failure of an independent Western Australia hinging on a multitude of factors, some within its control, others subject to the whims of global forces. Economically, an independent Western Australia would face both opportunities and challenges. On the one hand, the state would gain full control over its vast mineral resources, potentially translating into a significant windfall in government revenue. No longer obligated to share its wealth with the rest of Australia through the GST distribution system, an independent Western Australia could potentially invest heavily in infrastructure, education, and social programs, creating a more diversified and resilient economy. However, independence would also bring new economic uncertainties. The domino effect, Waxit, and the future of Australian federalism. The hypothetical secession of Western Australia would send shockwaves through the Australian Federation, calling into question the very foundations of the national project and potentially triggering a cascade of unintended consequences for the remaining states and territories. The delicate balance of power between the federal government and the states, carefully crafted over a century of negotiation and compromise, would be irrevocably altered, potentially emboldening secessionist movements in other parts of the country and ushering in an era of uncertainty and instability. The ripple effects of Waxit would be felt far and wide, forcing a fundamental reassessment of Australian federalism and its capacity to adapt to the evolving aspirations of its constituent parts. The hypothetical secession of Western Australia, while primarily an internal Australian matter, would not occur in a vacuum. The international community, with a keen eye on geopolitical shifts and the precedent-setting nature of such events, would be watching closely, analyzing the implications for their own interests and the broader global order. Waxit would serve as a litmus test for the resilience of existing international norms regarding statehood, territorial integrity, and the peaceful resolution of internal disputes. The ripples of this event would extend far beyond Australia's shores, potentially emboldening secessionist movements elsewhere, influencing the behavior of other states grappling with internal divisions, and reshaping the geopolitical landscape in subtle but significant ways. The story of Western Australia is one of ambition and resilience. As we delve deeper into the allure of independence, it's essential to hear from the people who call Western Australia home. In the heart of Perth, a young entrepreneur shares her dreams of a more autonomous future. We have the resources, the talent, and the spirit to carve our own path. Waxit isn't just about separation, it's about realizing our full potential. A farmer in the wheat belt region voices his concerns. For too long we've been overlooked. Our needs are different from the East Coast. Independence could mean a government that truly understands and supports us. An elder from an indigenous community speaks with wisdom. For us, the land is sacred. Any decision about independence must honor our history and our rights. We seek a future where our voices are heard and respected. A fisherman from the coast reflects, "The ocean is our lifeline. We want policies that protect our waters and our livelihoods. Independence could bring that focus." A survey was conducted in Western Australia in 2020, which revealed that 30% Western Australians want secession. They remind us that at the heart of this movement are real people with real aspirations, fears, and hopes for a better future. The enduring tension between Western Australia and the Federation, while a source of frustration and division, also presents an opportunity for reflection and reform. The Waxit movement, regardless of whether it ultimately succeeds in achieving its ultimate goal of independence, has served as a stark reminder of the need to address the underlying grievances that fuel secessionist sentiment. A more inclusive and responsive federation, one that recognizes the unique needs and aspirations of all its constituent parts, is essential not only for preserving national unity, but also for ensuring the long-term prosperity and stability of the nation as a whole. The challenge, as always, lies in translating this shared aspiration into concrete action. The future of Western Australia hangs in the balance, poised between the allure of independence and the pragmatism of seeking a more perfect union within the Australian Federation. The Waxit movement, while facing significant legal and political obstacles, has nonetheless succeeded in sparking a national conversation about the future of federalism and the delicate balance of power between the states and the federal government. The path forward for Western Australia, and indeed for the nation as a whole, remains uncertain, shaped by a complex interplay of economic forces, political calculations, and the evolving aspirations of the Australian people. On 8th of March, Western Australians headed to the polls for the 2025 state election. Premier Roger Cook's Labor Party secured a decisive victory, marking their third consecutive term in power. Labor clinched 41 seats, with a two-party preferred vote exceeding 57%. This outcome is among the largest in the Australian Labor Party's history, second only to the 2021 landslide by Mark McGowan. In his victory speech, Premier Cook emphasised his commitment to addressing housing, health, and cost of living challenges. The election results have reignited discussions about Western Australia's secessionist movement, commonly referred to as Waxit. The Waxit Party, formerly known as the Small Business Party, advocates for Western Australia's independence, citing economic and political grievances. Labor's continued dominance may influence the dynamics of this movement, as proponents argue that a single-party stronghold could either suppress or fuel desires for greater autonomy. This situation prompts a pivotal question. Should Western Australia pursue a path similar to Catalonia's quest for independence from Spain, or consider a relationship akin to that of New Zealand, a sovereign nation yet closely tied to Australia? Alternatively, is maintaining its status within the Australian Federation the most beneficial course? We'd love to hear your thoughts on Western Australia's future. Should it seek independence, greater autonomy, or remain an integral part of Australia? Share your opinions in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on this and other pressing issues. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the topics that matter to you.